He didn't sound upset. He didn't sound guilty. He said it the way people say things. They've already decided. It's probably better if you don't come this new year. End quote. I sighed. There was no pause after. No explanation waiting to follow. I held the phone in my hand and looked around the room. Nothing had changed. The light was the same. The chair was still where it always was. I could have asked why. I didn't. I could have said it hurt. I didn't. I said, "Okay." It's Maker growl. Not because I understood, but because I knew the conversation was already over. After we hung up, I didn't cry. I just sat there, longer than I needed to. That was the moment I realized my presence had slowly become something to manage, not something to miss. If you see yourself in this story, if you've ever been asked not to come and stayed quiet anyway, type 1 the comments. It didn't happen all at once. There was no argument, no raised voice, no moment I could point to and say, this is where it changed. It arrived quietly, the way most things do when they don't want to be noticed. New Year used to feel full, not loud, not extravagant, just full. There were traditions I never questioned, dishes made the same way every year, the same clock counting down, the same chair I always sat in, slightly pulled back from the table. Nothing about it was remarkable. That's what made it feel permanent. Then, one year, the language changed. We're keeping it small this time. It stared by. It sounded practical, responsible, almost considerate. I nodded when he said it, even though he couldn't see me. Small didn't mean anything bad. Small meant fewer people, less stress, less noise. I told myself that. I told myself it was easier for them, that this was what growing families did, that adjustments were normal. I didn't ask what small included. I didn't ask what it excluded either. The next year, it came again. Still small. Still simple. Still easier this way. The words were familiar now. Comfortable. They slid into conversation without resistance. I noticed something then. I wasn't being asked what I preferred. I was being informed of what had already been decided. At first, I didn't mind. Being informed felt close enough. It felt like being considered. I told myself it was a detail, a small shift. After all, no one had said I wasn't welcome. No one had said don't come. They just hadn't said please come either. The difference felt too subtle to name. So I didn't. I adjusted. I stopped assuming, stopped preparing, stopped mentioning it unless it was brought up first. I learned to wait for cues. Sometimes they came late, sometimes not at all. When friends asked what my plans were for New Year, I smiled before answering. Oh, they're keeping it very simple this year. End quote. Tension with a word maver of 9. I liked how reasonable that sounded. How mature. Simple became a shield. It protected me from questions, from explanations, from having to admit I wasn't entirely sure where I fit anymore. I noticed the way conversations ended quickly when I asked for details. Not abruptly. Just efficiently. We'll see. That's a billet. We haven't finalized everything. End quote. We're still figuring it out. End quote. Always later. Always soon. I told myself I didn't need specifics. That I wasn't that kind of mother. The kind who needed reassurance. The kind who complicated things. I had learned a long time ago how to make myself easy. I told myself that was love. When the message finally came, the one that said it would just be them this year, it didn't sound cold. It didn't sound unkind. It sounded settled, as if the decision had been living there for a while, waiting for the right moment to be said out loud. I read it twice, not because I didn't understand, but because I was checking whether there was something else I had missed. There wasn't. I noticed how quickly I accepted it, how naturally the word okay formed in my mind, as if I had been preparing for it, without realizing it. I didn't feel angry. I felt smaller, like a piece of the picture had been removed, and the frame had quietly adjusted around the empty space. Nothing looked broken. Everything still worked. That was the unsettling part. I started remembering past New Year's, not the big moments, the small ones. The way someone always forgot the time zone difference. The way the countdown never lined up perfectly. The way we laughed anyway. I remembered standing in the kitchen, checking the oven, listening for footsteps behind me. Those memories didn't hurt. What hurt was how gently they no longer belonged to the present. I realized then that I hadn't been pushed out. I had been eased out. Slowly. Carefully. So carefully that I hadn't noticed. Until my place felt optional. No one had meant to hurt me. That was clear. They were just making things simpler. And somehow, without anyone saying it directly, I had become the thing that complicated the picture. I didn't say that out loud. I didn't even say it to myself at first. I just sat with the feeling, the quiet awareness that something had shifted. Without asking my permission, that new year wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't painful. It was tidy, and I wasn't part of the arrangement. The feeling didn't arrive loudly. It settled in the way dust does. Slow, almost polite, easy to ignore if you don't look too closely. Nothing seemed wrong on the surface. When we spoke, his voice was still warm, familiar. He asked how I was. I asked about work. We exchanged the usual things. That's what made it harder to trust my own discomfort. If nothing was wrong, why did I feel like something was missing? I blamed myself first. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that this was what happens as families grow. That expectations change quietly, without permission. People get busy. Lives expand. That's normal, I said. New Year doesn't mean the same thing to everyone anymore. It doesn't have to. I reminded myself of my own younger years, how crowded everything felt, how overwhelming obligations became. I told myself I would have wanted space too. That explanation felt kind, reasonable, so I held on to it. When days passed without updates, I didn't ask. When weeks passed, I smiled through it. Friends would mention their plans casually. Trips, dinners, family gatherings. I listened carefully, as if their stories might help me understand my own. When they asked about my plans, I answered lightly, "Oh, they're keeping things simple this year." Tentry. I noticed how often I used that word. Simple. It made everything sound intentional, balanced. It removed any hint of loss. Simple meant no one was excluded, just fewer people included. I preferred that version. I began filling in the silences myself. He didn't call because he was tired. They didn't share details because they were overwhelmed. They weren't asking because they assumed I understood. I told myself that last one often. They assume I understand. Understanding became my role. It felt familiar. I had been understanding for most of my life. Understanding when schedules changed. Understanding when plans shifted. Understanding when I was told something after it had already happened. Understanding kept things smooth. It kept conversations easy, and I liked being easy. I didn't want to be the mother who needed reassurance, the one who asked too many questions. So I stayed quiet, not out of fear, out of habit. Sometimes, late at night, I replayed conversations in my head. Not arguments, just moments. A pause before a reply. A sentence that ended too quickly. A detail that never came. I wondered if I should have asked more. Then I told myself not to. If I asked, I might hear something I wasn't ready to carry. So I chose not knowing. It felt safer. I began to notice how often I waited. Waited for a call. Waited for clarity. Waited for the right time to speak. Waiting became a background sound. Always there. Low. Persistent. But I still believed it was temporary. Temporary was comforting. Temporary meant my place still existed. Just paused. I remembered earlier New Year's. Not the celebrations themselves, but the planning. The casual messages. The shared anticipation. Those things didn't happen anymore. I noticed that I only found out about plans once they were already settled. Not discussed. Not shaped. Settled. At first I thought that was considerate. Why bother me with decisions already made? That explanation worked, until I realized how rarely I was involved, before things were final. Still, I didn't call it exclusion. I called it efficiency. They were busy. They were managing a lot. And I was good at adapting. I had always been. One afternoon, I stood in my kitchen and caught myself checking the time. Not because I was waiting for anything specific, just out of habit, as if something might arrive. If I stayed alert long enough, that's when I realized how often my attention leaned outward, toward possibility, toward expectation. I told myself that was normal. Parents wait. Mothers wait. Waiting is part of the role. I didn't question that. I didn't question why waiting felt heavier than before. I didn't question why my stomach tightened every time the phone stayed silent. Instead, I found better explanations. They didn't want to disturb me. They assumed I had my own plans. They didn't think it mattered. Each explanation felt plausible. Together, they formed a story I could live with. A story where no one was at fault. That mattered to me. I didn't want to believe there was a pattern. Patterns require acknowledgement. Acknowledgement requires response. And I wasn't ready for that. I told myself I was being mature, supportive, that I was giving them space, the way good parents do. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, another thought crept in. What if I wasn't being given space? What if I was simply being left out? I pushed that thought away quickly. It felt disloyal, unfair. They hadn't done anything wrong. So I chose the kinder explanation. Again, I noticed how often I edited myself, how questions softened into statements, how curiosity turned into acceptance. I told myself that love doesn't need constant confirmation, that presence doesn't have to be loud. I believed that. I needed to, because admitting otherwise would have meant admitting that something important was shifting without my consent, and I wasn't ready to see that yet. So I kept understanding, I kept adjusting, I kept waiting, not knowing that waiting was slowly becoming the only place I still existed. There were moments when I could have spoken. I remember each one clearly because I chose not to. The first time was during a short call on a Sunday afternoon. His voice sounded distracted, background noise, laughter that wasn't meant for me. I asked casually, "So, are you doing anything special for New Year?" "It's not now." There was a pause, just long enough for me to notice it. "Well," he said, "we're keeping it pretty simple this year. I have Danny's and Aro." Simple again. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "That sounds nice," I said. I could have asked who would be there. I didn't. I didn't want to sound curious, or worse, excluded. Another time, the silence showed up differently. He mentioned a plan, as if I already knew it. A place, a time, a decision that had clearly been made earlier. I said, "Oh, okay. Expenses. Expenses on Avers 11. Not because I understood, but because the moment didn't invite questions. I could hear it in his tone. The conversation wasn't open. It was closing. So I let it. I told myself it wasn't worth pressing, that details didn't matter. That being included didn't always mean being involved. I told myself a lot of things. The silences began to stack. A message that ended too quickly. A call that didn't come back. Plans referenced without context. Each one arrived with a choice. Ask or don't. Every time, I chose not to. Silence felt safer than curiosity. Curiosity could lead somewhere. I didn't want to stand. I learned to smooth over the gaps. If a question formed in my mind, I softened it. If it still felt heavy, I erased it completely. I became careful with my words, careful not to ask too much, careful not to need clarity, careful not to make anything awkward. I told myself I was protecting the relationship. That restraint was maturity. One evening, he stopped by briefly, just to drop something off. He stood near the door, coat still on, in motion. We talked about ordinary things. The weather, traffic, work. The new year didn't come up. It sat between us anyway, unspoken, unmoved. I watched his eyes move around the room. They didn't land anywhere for long. Not on the chair, not on the table, not on me. I realized then that he already knew what I might ask, and that he didn't want to answer. So, I didn't ask. When he left, the door closed softly behind him. The house felt quieter than before, not because it was empty, but because something had been swallowed. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I replayed the moment where I could have said something, just one sentence, just enough to name myself. I didn't. I told myself there would be another chance. Later. Soon. Those words became familiar. Later. Soon. I practiced being agreeable. I practiced saying, "Whatever works for you. It's now there." I practiced not needing confirmation. Silence became something I wore easily. Too easily. I noticed how often I said, "It's fine. It's not Kel," even when it wasn't. Especially when it wasn't. At a small gathering, someone asked about my New Year plans. The question was warm, casual. I felt my body tense before my voice responded. "Oh, they're keeping things small," I said. The words came out smoothly, as if rehearsed, as if I had said them many times before. Because I had. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my hands. They were still, too still. I wondered when I had started, choosing quiet so automatically, when silence stopped being a pause and became a habit. No one had asked me to step back. No one told me to stay quiet. I had chosen it, again and again, because silence felt cooperative, reasonable, kind. I thought that by saying less, I was making space. I didn't realize I was the one being moved. I remembered teaching him to speak up, to say what he needed, to name discomfort. I had encouraged honesty, and here I was, doing the opposite, swallowing words before they had a chance to exist. I told myself this was temporary, that once the new year passed, things would settle, that I could speak then, after, later, soon. There was a moment, small, ordinary, when something shifted. I was about to send a message, nothing important, just a check-in. My fingers hovered over the screen, and I stopped. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I realized how much I had already chosen silence. I wasn't waiting to be included anymore. I was waiting, not to feel foolish. That frightened me. Because silence had stopped being gentle, it had become protective. I wasn't quiet to keep the peace. I was quiet because I was afraid of what I might hear. If I finally spoke, by the time I noticed how quiet I had become, silence was no longer something I chose. It was something I lived inside. I didn't notice it the first time. It didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with conflict or raised voices. It slipped in quietly, the way small changes do, when no one thinks they matter. The first thing I noticed was timing. I would send a message in the morning. Nothing urgent, just checking in. Hours passed. When the reply came, it was warm enough. Busy day. End quote. We'll talk later. I have action bias. Later didn't always come. At first, I told myself this was normal. People get busy. Schedules overlap. That explanation had always worked before. Then I noticed something else. I wasn't part of the conversations anymore. Not intentionally excluded. Just not included. Plans were mentioned, as if I already knew them. We talked about it in the group chat. If you have every 32, I paused. What group chat? I asked. There was a brief silence, then a light laugh. Oh, right. You're probably not in that one. Do have love, that one. As if there were several. As if it made sense I wouldn't be there. I smiled. It's fine, I said. Because asking why felt heavier than letting it go. Messages still came to me, just differently. Summaries, updates, decisions already made. We already decided. It's critic. We already booked it. And course. Already. That word appeared more often than I realized. I wasn't being asked what I thought. I was being informed of what had been settled. At first I told myself this was considerate. Why involve me in decisions I didn't need to worry about? That explanation worked, until I realized how rarely I was asked anything at all. Sometimes, when I did reply thoughtfully, a few lines, carefully chosen, the response was a single emoji, and I know that is a difference. Nothing else. No question. No continuation. Just confirmation that it had been seen. The first time, I laughed it off. The second time, I paused. By the third time, I understood. The conversation had ended before it had begun. I wasn't being ignored. I was being closed. Then came the photos. They appeared online before anyone mentioned them to me. Smiling faces, a place I recognized, a moment I hadn't been part of. I looked carefully, not out of jealousy, but out of instinct, as if I might find myself somewhere in the background. I never did. I didn't comment. I didn't ask. I didn't want to draw attention to the absence. I told myself I would see them later, that this was just one moment, but moments have a way of stacking. I noticed how rarely my schedule was considered. Once, I mentioned a small conflict. Nothing serious. He said lightly, "Oh, don't worry about that. I'm saddened to have for. Not will adjust. Not will figure it out. Just don't worry." Because it didn't change anything. That's when the word finally surfaced. Optional. Optional means everything continues, whether you arrive or not. Optional means your presence doesn't shift the outcome. Optional sounds reasonable. It isn't. I wasn't pushed away. I wasn't rejected. I was simply no longer necessary. I had moved from being included to being informed to being optional. And no one noticed because I hadn't made it difficult. Because I had been easy, understanding, quiet. One evening, I stood in my living room, phone in my hand, scrolling through messages that ended in short replies and small symbols. Thumbs up, hearts, no questions, no openings. I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked what I wanted. Not politely, not casually, actually asked. That night, I sat down and let the word settle. Optional. It didn't arrive with anger. It arrived with clarity. I hadn't been forgotten. I had been adjusted out, and the adjustment had worked. Life moved smoothly without me. Plans stayed intact. Conversations continued. Decisions were made. Nothing collapsed. That was the hardest part to accept. Not that I wasn't needed, but that things were easier when I wasn't considered. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't point it out. I just noticed. And once I noticed, I couldn't unsee it. Optional wasn't a role anyone had given me. It was one I had grown into by staying quiet for too long. By the end of that week, I understood something clearly. No one had done anything wrong. They had simply learned that I would adapt. And adaptation, when repeated, becomes expectation. That was the moment. The ache changed. It stopped asking questions. It stopped waiting. It became awareness. I wasn't being left behind. I had already been moved aside. It took me longer than I expected to understand it, not because it was complicated, but because it was quiet, and because I didn't want the answer to be what it was. At first, I told myself this was about timing, about planning, about stress. Big events do that to people. They narrow focus. They simplify priorities. I told myself this was temporary, that once things settled, everything would find its balance again. But the feeling didn't leave. It followed me through ordinary moments, while I folded laundry, while I washed dishes, while I stood at the sink, staring out the window longer than necessary. That's when I realized this wasn't really about New Year. It wasn't about a holiday, or a date, or a plan I hadn't been included in. It was about something quieter, something harder to admit. I started paying attention to when I was contacted, not how often, but why. The pattern wasn't obvious at first. It rarely is. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I was contacted when something needed to be handled, clarified, absorbed. When plans became complicated, when emotions needed to be softened, when someone needed patience, I was still the call for reassurance, for understanding, for calm. That role felt familiar. I had lived inside it for years, without naming it. When things were tense, I was reached for. When something felt uncertain, I was included. When there was discomfort to manage, I appeared. But when things were simple, when plans were exciting, when joy moved easily, I wasn't needed. And so I wasn't there. That realization landed slowly, not with anger, with exhaustion. I thought back to how often I had adjusted myself without being asked, changed my schedule, delayed my plans, made space automatically. I did it because I loved them, because I believed that's what love looked like, being available, being flexible, being easy. I never asked what that availability was costing me. I began replaying old conversations, not to assign blame, but to understand. The calls that came late at night, the messages that began with, "Can I ask you something?" End quote. "I just need your opinion." I would keepa. "We're dealing with something." God understand. I was always there. I listened. I reassured. I steadied. And then the conversation ended. No follow-up. No shared anticipation. Just resolution. I wasn't being invited into their lives. I was being brought in to stabilize them. I realized how rarely I was contacted, just to be known, to be told something early, to be included in the waiting. I usually found out once decisions were locked in, once plans were final. At that point, nothing could be complicated by my presence. That's when the truth finally surfaced. I hadn't been reduced because I was unwanted. I had been reduced because I was efficient. I made things easier. I didn't ask many questions. I didn't express discomfort. I adapted quietly. That made me convenient. And convenience has a strange effect on relationships. It slowly replaces consideration. I thought about the words I used most often. It's fine. It's God Eder. Whatever works. End quote. Don't worry about me. Indersquile. I had said them sincerely. But repetition turned sincerity into instruction. I had taught people how to treat me. I had taught them that I would adapt no matter what, that my presence was optional, that my feelings were manageable. I had confused generosity with self-erasure. That realization hurt more than exclusion ever could, because it meant I couldn't place all the responsibility outside myself. I had participated, not deliberately, not consciously, but consistently, and consistency builds expectation. I noticed something else too. The warmth returned when I was needed again. A longer call, more explanation, a tone that felt familiar, and suddenly, I understood the pattern completely. I was visible again. When I was useful again, the sentence settled heavily in my chest. I was useful again, not loved again, not missed again. Useful. The word felt sharp. I thought about how easily usefulness can be mistaken for worth, how being relied on can feel like being valued, especially when you've lived inside that role for a long time. Need feels important. Urgency feels intimate. But usefulness has conditions. It appears when required and disappears when it's no longer necessary. Love doesn't work that way. I realized I had been measuring my value by how often I was needed, how quickly I responded, how much I absorbed without complaint. I had learned to feel important through service, and when the service wasn't required, I faded. No one intended that. But intention doesn't change impact. I saw how quietly dignity can be traded for harmony, how easily a person can shrink when they believe being easy is a virtue. I had thought being low maintenance made me easier to love. Instead, it made me easier to overlook. That wasn't cruelty, it was consequence. I noticed how little space there was for my own needs in this dynamic. When I expressed nothing, things flowed smoothly. When I required something, time, clarity, inclusion, the system slowed. So I learned to require less. Eventually, I required nothing. And when you require nothing, people stop checking. I wasn't angry when I saw this. Anger would have meant I still felt entitled. What I felt instead was tired. Tired of being valuable, only in moments of inconvenience. Tired of being the solution, not the presence. Tired of being appreciated privately and excluded publicly. I thought about how often I had said, I don't need much. It is noving. It sounded humble, but it wasn't humility. It was disappearance. I understood then that New Year hadn't changed anything. It had simply revealed the structure that already existed. A structure where my role was support and not participation, where my value was tied to ease, where my absence didn't disrupt the outcome. I wasn't heartbroken because I wasn't included. I was heartbroken because I realized I had trained everyone, including myself, to believe I didn't need to be. That realization didn't come with rage. It came with clarity. And clarity, once it arrives, doesn't leave. I didn't know yet what I would do with it, but I knew one thing for certain. I no longer wanted to be visible only when it was convenient. I no longer wanted to be useful at the cost of being considered. The agreement I had lived by for years, that my worth could be measured by how easy I made things for others, had expired. I hadn't announced it. I hadn't explained it. But inside me, something had already ended. And once that ended, there was no way to return to the way things had been. It didn't arrive as a realization. There was no moment where everything suddenly made sense. Nothing new entered my life. No apology. No invitation. No explanation. What changed was quieter than that. After the call ended that night, I didn't move right away. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I stayed where I was. The room was quiet in a way I hadn't noticed before. Not empty. Not lonely. Still. The kind of stillness that doesn't ask anything from you. I listened. The clock ticking. The refrigerator humming. The faint sound of wind brushing the window frame. Those sounds had always been there. I had just been too busy listening for something else. For a long time, silence had felt like a pause. Something waiting to be filled. Waiting for news. Waiting for contact. That night, it felt different. This silence wasn't waiting. It was simply there. The room didn't ask me to explain myself. It didn't ask me to be patient. It didn't ask me to understand anyone else's choices. It didn't ask me to be useful. It just held me. I stood and walked slowly through the house. Not searching, not checking, just noticing. The kitchen counter where I made tea every morning. The familiar edge I had learned to avoid without thinking. The couch where light arrived the same way each afternoon. Nothing here reacted to my mood. Nothing grew distant when I needed less. Nothing changed its tone when I stopped offering more. For the first time, I noticed the quiet generosity of a place that doesn't require anything in return. I realized how much of my life had been shaped by readiness, being ready to respond, being ready to adjust, being ready to understand. I had lived like a hinge, always turning towards someone else's movement. Here, nothing required adjustment. I could sit without performing calm. I could exist without explanation. That felt unfamiliar. I thought about how rarely I had allowed myself to live without purpose attached, without waiting, without hoping, without watching the distance between myself and someone else. I had been living as if my life were paused, held in suspension until the next update arrived, the next call, the next plan, the next invitation. But nothing here was paused. Morning still came. Light still moved across the floor. Evening still arrived quietly. Time didn't wait for permission. I noticed how peaceful it felt. Not to justify myself, I made dinner without checking my phone. Simple food, eaten slowly. Not because I was trying to be mindful, but because there was no urgency pulling me elsewhere. I didn't imagine who might call. I didn't rehearse what I would say. I didn't prepare myself for disappointment. I let the quiet be what it was. Not a punishment, not a void, just space. That was when something settled gently inside me. I already had a place where I belonged. Not because someone invited me, not because I was included, not because I was needed, but because it was mine. The realization didn't feel triumphant. It felt grounding. I had confused belonging with inclusion for a long time. I thought they were the same. They aren't. Inclusion is conditional. It depends on timing, on convenience, on mood. Belonging doesn't ask permission. Belonging doesn't shrink. When someone else grows busy, I sat by the window and watched the sky darken. The colors shifted slowly, without urgency, without asking anything of me. I realized how many years I had spent arranging my life around other people's schedules, waiting to be chosen, waiting to be remembered, waiting for a sign that I was still part of something. Here, I wasn't waiting. I was present. That distinction mattered. I thought about how often I had measured my worth by whether someone reached for me, how easily availability had replaced value. I saw now that my life continued, whether or not someone called, that my routines didn't need approval, that there were moments that belonged only to me, and always had. I didn't need to announce this realization. I didn't need to explain it. It was quiet, private, something I could keep without defending. I understood then why the earlier silence had hurt so much. Not because I was alone, but because I had forgotten that solitude could be whole. That being by myself didn't mean being incomplete. I wasn't meant to disappear into other people's lives. I was meant to stand somewhere solid, to occupy space without apologizing. That night, I slept deeply. Not from exhaustion, but from relief. The kind of relief that comes when you stop leaning outward and finally stand upright. Nothing had been resolved. No conversations concluded. No relationships repaired. But something inside me had shifted position. I wasn't reaching anymore. I was standing where I already was. I didn't know what would come next. And for the first time, I didn't need to. I wasn't waiting to be included. I was living inside a space that didn't require me to earn my place. And that was when I understood I had more than I thought. I just hadn't been looking at it. It didn't take long. Peace, I learned, is noticeable. And when it appears, it changes the way people look at you. The first message came a few days later. Short, casual. "Hey, can you call when you get a minute?" I said. No urgency, no explanation, just an opening. I read it once, then again. I noticed my body before my thoughts. The familiar tightening, the instinct to respond immediately. That reflex had lived in me for years. I didn't answer right away. I finished my tea. I rinsed the cup. I stood by the window a moment longer than necessary. Nothing dramatic, just choosing not to rush. When I finally called back, I kept my voice even. "Hi, I zid last I." He sounded relieved. Warm in a way that felt practiced. "We were just thinking about you," he said. "Wanted to check in." "It's crime." "Check in." I listened. I didn't fill the space. He talked about schedules, about how busy things had been, about how complicated everything felt lately. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Then he said it. "We might need a little help with something. I have no tane." There it was. Not a request yet, just a door left open. Help could mean many things. Time, availability, flexibility. It could mean stepping back into a role that hadn't been named, but had always been there. I waited. "Well," he added, "we were hoping you could be around more. Things feel overwhelming right now." Another, around more. I understood what that meant. Being accessible again, being on standby, being ready. The old instinct rose quickly, to say yes before the sentence finished, to reassure before discomfort settled. Something stopped me. Not anger, not resentment, clarity. "I'm not sure I can do that," I said quietly. The line went still, not disconnected. Paused. He laughed lightly, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. "Oh, it's nothing big," he said. "We just thought." "I know," I said. "I just can't." End quote. I didn't explain. I didn't soften it. Silence stretched between us. I could almost hear him recalibrating, trying a different approach. "We're family," he said finally. "That's what families do." Actional. The words were familiar, comforting, heavy. They had worked before. "Yes," I said, "and I need to take care of myself right now." End quote. Sanctification and subscribe. It was the first time I had said that out loud. Not defensively, not dramatically, just as a fact. He didn't argue. He didn't agree either. We ended the call politely, warmly, as if nothing unusual had happened. Afterward, I sat very still. I waited for guilt. It came, but softly, manageable. The next message came later that evening, from him again. "Can we talk tomorrow?" "You can dolls." Tomorrow had always meant yes, without conditions, without limits. I typed back slowly. "Sure." Briefly. I have that, well, the word felt strange under my fingers, but right. When we spoke the next day, his tone was careful, as if he was testing how far he could go, without breaking something. He talked about pressure, about responsibility, about how hard it had been to manage everything. I listened. I always listened. Then he said, "It would really help if you could be there for us. Like before. Ezra, like before." The phrase carried years inside it. Before boundaries. Before distance. Before I noticed myself disappearing. "I can't do that anymore," I said. He paused. Longer this time. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean," I said slowly, "I'm not available in the same way. It's not a day placed often as silence. Not anger. Not accusation. Confusion. He hadn't expected resistance. Not from me. "We're not asking for much," he said. "Just support." Ender. I know, I said, and I'm still here. Just not like that. As you know, the distinction mattered. I wasn't leaving. I wasn't punishing. I was redefining where I stood. He sighed, sounded tired. I guess things have changed, he said. Yes, I replied. They have. It's off it. We ended the call without conflict. But something lingered. A shift. Over the next few days, there were small attempts. A casual invitation. A suggestion to stop by. A message framed lightly. No pressure. Just opportunity. I declined gently. Consistently. I didn't offer alternatives. I didn't explain further. I noticed how quickly the tone cooled when I didn't bend. Not hostile. Just distant. I recognized the pattern. Access had been mistaken for affection. Availability for love. Without access, they didn't quite know how to reach me. That realization hurt more than I expected. But it also steadied me. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was simply not stepping back into a role that had cost me my peace. One evening, a message came that read, "You seem different lately." Mass. I read it carefully. Different. Not worse. Not better. Just no longer predictable. I typed back, "I am. Erstater. Nothing else." That night, I sat in my quiet living room and noticed how calm it felt. No tension in my chest. No rehearsed explanations. I realized something important. Peace has edges. And when someone tries to cross them, you feel it immediately. I hadn't built walls. I had simply stopped, leaving the door open. By default, I didn't know how they would respond in the long run. I didn't need to. This wasn't about their comfort. It was about mine. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to justify that to anyone. It happened on a morning that looked ordinary, the kind of morning that doesn't warn you. The sky was pale. The air was cool. Nothing felt dramatic. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a cup, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I stood there for a moment before answering, not out of fear, out of awareness. There was a time when I would have opened the door immediately without grounding myself first. This time, I breathed, then I opened it. He stood there, hands in his pockets. No smile, no irritation, just a look I hadn't seen before, uncertain, as if he wasn't sure which version of me he was about to meet. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside. He didn't come in right away. He hesitated, as if waiting for a signal that no longer existed. When he finally entered, his eyes moved slowly around the room, not searching, not judging, noticing the quiet, the order, the lack of urgency. We sat across from each other, not close, not far. The space between us felt deliberate. "This place feels different," he said, not accusing. "Observational." "It is," I replied. He nodded, as if confirming something for himself. "You seem different," he said. Again, not harsh, just careful. "I am," I said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We didn't mean to push you away," he said. "That was never the intention." End quote. I waited. I had learned the value of waiting. "I think things just got complicated," he continued. "Everyone was stressed. We assumed you understood." End quote. Everyone understood. That word again. It had followed me for years. I looked at him carefully. "I did understand," I said. "That's why I stayed quiet." "It's no that happened." His brow tightened, as if that answer didn't fit the story he had prepared to tell. "You didn't say anything," he said. "No," I replied. "I didn't." End quote. He shifted in his seat. "You could have told us how you felt," he added. I held his gaze. "I could have," I said, "but I noticed something. It's grayed." He waited. Whenever I stayed quiet, I continued. Things moved forward easily. When I spoke, they slowed down. "I haven't brayed." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I didn't want to be an obstacle," I said. "So I became invisible." End quote. The words sat between us. "Invisible. That's not fair," he said softly. "I know," I replied. "It just happens. It's a bit of us to do, and coming as the better He exhaled, rubbing his hands together. "We thought you were okay with it," he said. "You never objected." End quote. I nodded. "That's the problem," I said. "You learned I would adapt, so you stopped checking." "I know." His jaw tightened. "That's not how it was," he said. "Then tell me how it was," I replied. Silence. Not defensive. Not angry. Empty. He looked down at his hands. Finally, he said, "We assumed you'd always be there. I'm so in the day. Always. Not with us. Not included. Just there. I was," I said. "I am." And one. He looked up, searching my face. "Then why does it feel like you've stepped away?" he asked. I chose my words carefully. "I didn't step away," I said. "I stepped back into myself." "I am." He stared at me, startled. "That sounds harsh," he said. "It isn't," I replied. "It's honest." End quote. We sat inside that honesty. The room felt smaller somehow, more focused, as if there was less room for avoidance. "So what does that mean now?" he asked. The question carried weight, not curiosity, expectation. I knew this moment mattered. "It means," I said slowly, "I won't keep shrinking, to make things easier." "Very well," and the man agrees. "In 70-25 as a fair," he leaned back. "You're saying you won't help?" he asked. "I didn't say that," I replied. "I said I won't disappear," and escorted by. End quote. He shook his head faintly. "It feels like you're punishing us," he said. I felt the old reflex rise, the urge to reassure, to soften. I let it pass. "I'm protecting myself," I said. "That's different." It's comment. He stood and paced the room. "You know how hard this has been for us," he said. "We're trying to build a life in ever." "I know," I said. "I built one too. And it was..." He stopped, turned toward me. "That's not the same," he said. "It is," I replied. "I just did it quietly." End quote. End quote. Where use it 2000 bought. Something shifted then. Not in him. In me. I realized I wasn't afraid of his disappointment anymore. I wasn't afraid of being misunderstood. I had crossed a line. I couldn't step back over. He spoke again, more carefully now. "So where do I fit now?" he asked. The question surprised me. I hadn't expected it. I thought for a moment. "You fit," I said, "where respect exists." And it did. He swallowed. "And if that takes time?" he asked. "Then it takes time," I replied. He nodded slowly, not agreeing, but hearing. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "You really have changed," he said. "Yes," I answered. "I have, you all." The door closed behind him. I stood there for a long moment, not shaking, not relieved. Steady. I understood then that something irreversible had happened. Not between us, within me. I had spoken without apologizing. I had held my ground without raising my voice. I had chosen clarity over comfort, and I knew, even if everything else remained uncertain, this part would not change again. That was the day everything shifted. Not loudly, not publicly, but permanently. I didn't notice the loss right away, because nothing dramatic disappeared. There were no slammed doors, no raised voices, no final words meant to close a chapter. Life simply became quieter, in a different way. After that day, the calls slowed. Not stopped, just spaced. The kind of spacing that doesn't demand explanation. The kind that lets everyone pretend. Nothing has changed. Messages still came, polite, brief. They no longer carried the weight of being shared. I told myself this was adjustment, that people needed time. But somewhere inside me, in a place that didn't argue, I knew better. When I stopped bleeding for them, I stopped being familiar. I had been the soft place they leaned on, the one who absorbed tension without complaint, the one who stayed calm, so others could unravel. I had been predictable in my availability, reliable in my patience. That version of me was gone, and with her, something else went too. I lost the role of the mother who waits, the mother who keeps the porch light on, even when it isn't necessary. The mother who plans her days around possibility, who leaves margins in her schedule, just in case. The mother who listens for footsteps that may never come. I didn't realize how much that role had shaped me until it was no longer there, until my evenings no longer bent toward expectation. There were nights when the house felt unusually still, not lonely, just unoccupied by hope. No checking the clock, no wondering if the phone would ring, no quiet calculations about time zones or moods, or the right moment to reach out. At first, the absence felt like relief. My body loosened in ways I hadn't noticed were tense. Then, slowly, it felt like grief, not for what I had lost with them, but for who I had been while loving that way. I missed the familiarity of caring without limits. Even though it had hurt me, pain, at least, had been proof of connection. It had made my place feel undeniable. Now there was space, clean, unmarked, a space that didn't require vigilance, and I didn't know what to do with it yet. Days passed more evenly. No spikes of anticipation, no drops of disappointment. I noticed how easily time moved, without the rhythm of waiting, without the subtle readiness I had carried for years. I wasn't asked what I thought, but I also wasn't required to reassure. I wasn't smoothing anything over. That balance felt strange, like holding something fragile and realizing it no longer needed support. I understood something difficult then. When I stopped offering myself as a constant, they didn't reach for me the same way. Not because they didn't care, but because care had been trained to flow one way. I had been the one who filled gaps, who softened edges, who made transitions easier for everyone else. I had carried continuity. Without that, the rhythm changed, and rhythms, once broken, rarely returned to what they were. I mourned that quietly, not the relationship itself, but the illusion that it could remain unchanged. Once I chose myself, I lost the comfort of being needed. That was harder to admit than I expected. Need can feel like love when you've lived inside it long enough. It gives structure. It gives urgency. Without it, I had to face a simpler truth. Love that depends on self-erasure isn't sustainable, even when it's given willingly, even when it's wrapped in good intentions. I missed the small moments I used to cherish, hearing about their day, offering advice that might not be taken, being included in problems that weren't mine to solve. Those moments faded, not abruptly, steadily. In their place was something calmer, but also emptier, a neutrality that didn't hurt sharply, but lingered. I felt it most in ordinary situations, at the grocery store, when I reached for something and instinctively thought to tell someone. At the end of the day, when silence stretched without the usual check-in, when something amusing happened and I reached for my phone, then remembered there was no one waiting for that version of me anymore. That realization arrived softly, like a hand lowering. After waving for too long, I didn't blame them. I blamed the dynamic. I had bled quietly for years, thinking that was what love required, thinking endurance was the same as devotion. When I stopped, the wound closed, but the scar remained. The scar was the distance, not hostile, not angry, just present. I also lost a certain innocence, the belief that patience would always be rewarded. That understanding would naturally be reciprocated. That silence would be read as grace. Sometimes silence is read as absence, and absence becomes habit. I saw how easy it is for people to adjust to a reduced version of you, how quickly the extraordinary becomes expected, how sacrifice, when consistent, turns invisible. When I stopped bleeding, I stopped being extraordinary in that way, and that came with a price. I wasn't invited into everything anymore, but I also wasn't burdened with everything. The trade-off was real. There were moments I questioned my choice, late at night, in quiet rooms. Was it worth it? to lose closeness. For peace? The answer didn't arrive immediately. It came slowly, in small, unremarkable realizations. I slept better. I spoke more honestly with myself. I no longer rehearsed conversations that hadn't happened yet. I no longer prepared myself to absorb disappointment. The loss was real, but so was the gain. Still, I allowed myself to grieve. I grieved the mother I had been, the one who waited without limits. She had loved deeply, even if it cost her. Letting her go wasn't easy. It felt like closing a chapter without knowing what the next one would look like. I learned that healing doesn't erase loss. It redefines it. And somewhere inside that redefinition, one sentence finally settled into place. Clear. Unavoidable. I didn't lose my son. I lost the version of me who begged. Life didn't pause for my understanding. Morning still came. Light still reached the kitchen the same way. The street outside sounded no different than before, only I was quieter inside it. After everything shifted, there was no aftermath. No long conversations. No emotional cleanup. No moment where everything was named and neatly resolved. Just space. A wide, undefined space that didn't explain itself. I had to learn how to live inside it, slowly. At first, it felt unfamiliar, like walking into a room after the furniture has been moved. Everything was still there. The walls, the windows, but nothing was where it used to be. I woke up earlier than I needed to, not from anxiety, from habit. My body still expected something to happen, someone to call, something to prepare for. There was nothing. I made coffee and stood by the window longer than usual, not thinking, just watching. I watched the light stretch across the floor, the way it paused on the edge of the table before moving on. I noticed things I hadn't noticed before. The sound of the kettle before it boiled, the quiet between passing cars, the way morning air carried sound differently when nothing was waiting on it. The quiet wasn't heavy. It didn't press down on me. It was neutral. That surprised me. I had expected silence to feel like punishment. Instead, it felt like space that hadn't decided what it was yet. I began walking more. Short routes, familiar streets, paths I had taken for years, but never slowly. People nodded. Some waved. There were conversations that didn't involve explaining myself. How are you? This takes Spence of wedded one. I'm all right. It's not Tim. I meant it. Not happy. Not sad. Just present. That felt like enough. I returned to routines I hadn't realized I'd abandoned. Cooking without checking the time. Reading without distraction. Listening to music without waiting for a call. There was relief in doing things. For no reason at all. Not productive. Not symbolic. Just because the moment was there. I noticed how my body responded. Less tension in my shoulders. Breathing that didn't feel guarded. As if my body had been waiting for permission to rest. But the quiet wasn't always gentle. Some evenings, it pressed in. At dusk, when the day slowed and light softened, I felt the absence again. Not of them. Of the life I used to orbit. I missed being asked. Missed being considered. Even when it had hurt, it had given shape to my days. A direction to lean toward. A reason to stay alert. Now, there was no shape. I had to let the day be what it was, without leaning toward anyone. That felt heavier than I expected. Friends noticed the change before I named it. You seem calmer, one said. You seem different. Another, different again. That word followed me. I didn't explain. I didn't have language for it yet. I wasn't rebuilding. I wasn't starting over. I was adjusting, learning how to stand without leaning. There were moments I almost reached out, not to ask for anything, not to reopen anything, just to reconnect. The old rhythm, the familiar back and forth. Each time I stopped, not from pride, from honesty. I didn't want the quiet, broken by the same patterns. I wanted to see what this new rhythm would become. If I let it continue, I learned how to sit with myself, without distraction. That wasn't easy. Without noise, old thoughts resurfaced, questions I hadn't answered yet, Did I pull back too much? Was there another way this could have gone? There were no immediate answers, only time. I let time pass without trying to manage it. I went to the market on Saturdays, the same one I'd gone to for years. The stalls hadn't changed. Vendors remembered me, asked about small things. Weather, produce, nothing important. There was comfort in being known, without expectations attached. I realized how rarely I had allowed myself to exist without being useful, without providing something. Here, I was just a person, moving through a day that felt unfamiliar, but not wrong. Evenings became predictable. Dinner, a book, the news, sometimes nothing at all. I stopped filling silence with noise. I let it stay. I let it stretch without shaping it. The quiet didn't heal me. It didn't fix anything. It gave me room. Room to notice what I had been carrying. Room to set some of it down. I wasn't at peace yet, but I wasn't bleeding either. That felt like progress. I learned that living after something changes doesn't require understanding everything. It only requires staying. Staying in your body, staying in your days. Letting time do what it does, without rushing it. Some nights, I still wondered what they thought of me now. If they noticed the distance, if they felt it the way I did. Those questions still came, but they didn't control me. They drifted through and passed. Like weather, the quiet had become a place I could return to. Not to hide, to breathe. And for now, that was enough. There are things you only understand after they have already cost you something. Not lessons you can pass on easily. Not truths that sound convincing when spoken out loud. They don't arrive as advice. They arrive as weight, quiet realizations that settle long after the moment has passed, long after the choice has already been made. I wish I had known that love doesn't grow stronger just because you make yourself smaller. For a long time, I thought patience was proof of devotion. That waiting without complaint meant I was being generous. That endurance was the same as care. I didn't know that patience, when unbalanced, can quietly teach people to overlook you, not intentionally, not cruelly, just gradually. I wish I had known that silence is not always grace. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's habit, sometimes it's the hope that things will correct themselves without you having to speak. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to disrupt anything. I didn't realize that by doing so, I was allowing myself to disappear gently. I wish I had known that being understanding doesn't guarantee being understood. I gave context to everyone else's behavior. I explained it away, softened it in my mind. I told myself they didn't mean it. They were stressed. They were busy. I rarely asked anyone to do the same for me. I wish I had known that love should not require rehearsal. I spent too much time preparing for conversations that never happened, practicing calm responses, practicing acceptance, practicing not needing too much. I didn't realize how much energy that quiet preparation was taking from me. How often I arrived, already tired, to moments that hadn't even begun. I wish I had known that being needed is not the same as being valued. Need can feel urgent. It can feel important, but urgency is not intimacy. Being relied on can look a lot like being loved when you've lived inside it for a long time. I wish I had known that boundaries do not erase love, they clarify it. I believed that saying no would make me harder to love, that stepping back would create distance. What I didn't understand was that distance already existed. I was just the only one crossing it. I wish I had known that roles can trap you, even when they are wrapped in affection. I had become reliable in a way that required very little acknowledgement. Once a role becomes expected, gratitude often fades, not out of cruelty, out of comfort. People adjust quickly to what is always there. I wish I had known that self-respect doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand applause. It grows quietly, often in moments when you choose discomfort over familiarity. I thought standing up for myself would feel empowering. Instead, it felt calm, unremarkable, like standing on solid ground. After years of leaning, I wish I had known that relationships change when one person stops carrying more than their share. Not all change is growth. Some change is simply exposure. It shows you what was already there, what had been held in place by your effort alone. I wish I had known that grief can exist even when no one has done anything wrong. Sometimes grief comes from realizing what you hoped for was never promised. I mourned expectations I never voiced, dreams I never said out loud, because I assumed they were understood. I wish I had known that clarity often comes too late to prevent pain, but early enough to prevent repetition. I didn't need to relive the same hurt in different forms. I just needed to see it once without looking away. I wish I had known that being a mother doesn't mean being endlessly available. Love doesn't require constant access. It requires regard, and regard cannot exist when one person keeps stepping aside. I wish I had known that choosing myself was not an act of withdrawal. It was an act of return, not to who I used to be, but to who I had postponed for too long. I don't blame myself for not knowing these things sooner. I did what I thought love asked of me, with the understanding I had at the time. That matters. But if I could speak to that version of myself now, I wouldn't correct her. I wouldn't instruct her. I would just sit beside her and let her notice what she was already feeling. Because some things you are only allowed to understand after you've lived them. And understanding, when it finally arrives, doesn't shout. It settles quietly, like truth does. If you're listening to this, you might already recognize the quiet I'm talking about. Not the peaceful kind, the other one. The quiet that arrives after you stop asking, after you stop reminding, after you stop trying to stay visible. It doesn't announce itself. It settles. It shows up in ordinary moments, in pauses that last a little longer than before, in days that don't lean toward anyone anymore. There is a chair in my living room now that I think of differently. It sits near the window, not pushed forward, not pulled away, just there. It isn't decorative. It isn't symbolic in an obvious way. It's simply a place where someone could sit. Sometimes I notice it when the light shifts in the afternoon. Sometimes I don't notice it at all, and that too feels important. There was a time when that chair meant waiting, waiting for a visit, waiting for an explanation, waiting for someone to notice that I wasn't there. I used to arrange my life around that kind of waiting, leaving space everywhere. In my schedule, in my energy, in my silence. I left room for people who might come back, for conversations that might finally happen, for understanding that might arrive late. Now, I leave space differently, not as an offering, not as an invitation, as a boundary. The door isn't closed, but I'm not standing there anymore. That difference took me a long time to understand. I used to believe that leaving the door open meant staying ready, ready to explain, ready to forgive, ready to rearrange myself at a moment's notice. I thought that was generosity. I didn't know how much it asked of me. Now, the door stays open because it's part of the house, not because I'm waiting behind it. If someone wants to come in now, they know where I am. I haven't hidden. I haven't disappeared. But they also know I won't step aside to make it easier. I won't move the furniture to recreate old comfort. Respect has its own weight. It doesn't need reminders. It doesn't need negotiation. It either arrives or it doesn't. The chair stays, not as an invitation, as a possibility. And possibilities require effort. They require presence. They require intention. If you're listening to this and thinking, this feels familiar, I won't tell you what to do. I won't say speak up sooner. I won't say draw boundaries faster. You already know what you know. You've lived inside it. Maybe you're still waiting, still hoping that patience will be noticed, that endurance will be recognized, that silence will be rewarded. Or maybe you've already felt the shift, that quiet moment when something inside you says, I can't keep doing this the same way. If so, you're not wrong, and you're not late. There's a difference between closing a door and simply standing somewhere else. I didn't shut anyone out. I just stopped stepping aside. That choice didn't come with certainty. It didn't come with confidence. It came with clarity. And clarity is quieter than people expect. If someone wants to sit with me now, they'll have to sit with who I am, not who I used to be, not the version of me who adjusted first, who softened every edge, who made space at her own expense. And if no one comes, the chair doesn't look empty anymore. It doesn't feel abandoned. It looks like peace. It looks like a place that belongs to me. I still love quietly. I just don't disappear to do it. I don't chase understanding. I don't rehearse explanations. I don't wait to see whether my absence will finally be noticed. If someone wants to enter my life now, they'll do so with awareness, with respect, with the understanding that I will not shrink to make the room feel comfortable. And if that never happens, this space is still whole. The light still comes in, the same way every morning. The chair still holds its shape. The door still opens and closes, without effort. I live here, fully. So if you're listening to this, and something inside you has been holding its breath, you don't have to let go, all at once. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to announce anything. Just stop shrinking. That's enough. To begin. And if you've ever stopped asking to be invited, if you've ever noticed you were waiting to see whether anyone would notice your absence, you're not alone. You're just standing somewhere new